So what has come to our attention is there's been a number of instances where individuals are given referrals for home health care options when they're discharged from a hospital. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is some organizations or companies that might be considered fly-by-night companies get these referrals and then just don't do a really good job taking care of the senior citizen they've been hired to take care of. This creates a number of different problems. These companies will hire individuals without doing background checks. They oftentimes will pay them cash under the table, so the employee is not paying any taxes to the state. And it's really unfair to the many home health care businesses in our state that do things right, that are licensed and bonded, that do background checks on their employees and make sure they're properly trained to take care of our elderly. We create a real problem if we don't have a good continuum of care when an elderly person is discharged from the hospital. If they're not well cared for in their home, the odds are that they'll be back in the hospital sometime soon, and that is very costly to the entire system. Cook County is very unique in Illinois because of its size, obviously. It's much, much larger than any other county. And this has some negative repercussions for voters in Cook County when it comes time to choosing judges. Every 6 years, a judge in Illinois goes on what we call the retention ballot. And the people in that jurisdiction will vote yes or no on whether or not they keep that judge. Most of the counties throughout the state, you never see more than 2 or 3 judges on that retention ballot. In Cook County, you can have 60, 70 judges on the retention ballot. No layperson who doesn't spend every day of their life in court can identify and make a good judgment about 60 or 70 judges. No one has the level of knowledge you need to make an informed bet. I would submit even people who work in the courts don't know all 60 or 70 judges. So we're placing, I think, an unfair burden on voters. And I think you also have a scenario that develops where bad judges are not removed from the bench because of this. You sort of have you can't see the forest through the trees effect. And because of that, no Cook County judge has lost a retention vote since 1990. So going a quarter of a century without a judge losing a retention vote indicates to me that there's probably a lack of electoral accountability when it comes to the retention of judges, and it's just because of the large size of the retention ballot. So what I've proposed is putting all Cook County judges moving forward into the sub-circuit system. Within Cook County, we already have sub-circuits that can elect judges for the first time, but when the judges are retained, they go into a county-wide ballot. My proposal would, over time, move all the retention of judges in Cook County into sub-circuits, which means when the Cook County voter goes to vote every 2 years, their experience will be like the voters from the rest of the state. They won't have to choose to retain 60 or 70 voters, they'll only have to choose to retain 4 or 5. We've created a tremendous hardship for our universities during the budget standoff the last couple of years. And a lot of that has grown, obviously, along the lines that we have underfunded them, but they're also hurt by the uncertainty. There are students here in the state and throughout the Midwest who really question whether or not they should enroll in Illinois schools because of this lack of certainty. What the University of Illinois is proposing, and I am sponsoring, is a proposal that will give them some economic certainty. It will lock in their funding levels at what they received from the state in 2015, and will require that the university meet a number of benchmarks in order to keep that funding and to have the funding grow just at the rate of inflation. The university, in return for those guarantees from the legislature and the governor, will put in place a series of metrics that they will have to reach. And if they don't reach those funds, the state will not have to, if they don't reach those goals of those metrics, the state will not have to fund them at that level. So some of those metrics involve in-state admissions of in-state students to the University of Illinois. Getting into certain colleges in the University of Illinois is tremendously competitive, and a lot of my constituents have a tough time getting into the University of Illinois in Urbana. This would help ensure that more local students, state of Illinois students, can get into the U of I. It would also require the university to reach certain levels of minority enrollment and attainment in order to ensure that everyone in the state of Illinois has access to the school. So the essential makeup of it is U of I has to hit these goals. If they hit these goals, they will get funding. And what this, I think, is really something that's been called for a long time and we've never really gotten to, and that is performance-based funding for our universities. Reward our universities that are retaining students, keeping students in the state, and are doing things right. That will make our universities more attractive, and because of the budget standoff, I think universities really need this boost. This particular law is for the University of Illinois, but it can be replicated by all of our universities. I was approached by a business association in my district that were rather alarmed when they found a notice hanging up on a vacant business on a business strip in which an individual, they didn't know who this individual was, said that they were going to file in court to take control of the house under a plan designed to restore abandoned housing in Illinois. I think the underlying law that enables people to go in and, by court order, take over abandoned housing units that have been abandoned by banks who have foreclosed on them is a good law. But what it opens the door up to is for non-for-profit organizations or individuals to take over property, sometimes in a commercial strip, and develop it into housing. And that might be a good idea. It might work. The problem with the current law is that a judge who knows nothing about urban development, nothing about housing, is the lone person who says whether or not the plan makes sense, the new housing plan makes sense. The local municipality has no say in this. I think that's wrong. I think the local municipality should have to approve any sort of housing plan that a developer, even a non-for-profit developer, proposes. In the case in my district, this is a commercial strip. It probably doesn't make sense to the other businesses on the block to have a storefront business developed into housing. Could run into zoning issues and everything else. So I think it's important that we have municipalities, that we have local control of these development issues, and we don't just leave it up to a judge. There have been a couple of appellate court decisions that have sort of confused the sex offender registration law, and they've provided obstacles for law enforcement agencies that have wanted to prosecute individuals for violating the sex offender registration. One of the things that these appellate courts have opened the door up for is for an individual to satisfy the law by merely reporting to the police to register, even if he attempts to register at an address that is forbidden because, say, it's too close to a school. He can report, be refused the ability to register there because it violates the law, and then leave, but not be prosecuted because the court has said reporting is kind of the same as registering. I don't think that's at all the intent of the original legislation. The law intended to have individuals come to the police department, provide an address, and make sure the address wasn't too close to a school or a park before they can register there. Merely reporting to the police agency of jurisdiction and leaving without registering at a proper house, I think, is not adequate. That's just not what the law calls for. And it basically results in more and more sex offender people who should be registered under the registry not signing up. And police agencies have tried to arrest them or prosecute them for them, but state's attorneys throughout the state have said, well, because of this appellate court decision, we might have a hard time getting a conviction because the judge might rule, well, the individual even though the individual didn't register, he reported. So it's a little bit of a confusing aspect of the law, but the bottom line is we need our sex offender registry to be accurate, and we need to give the police officers the tools they need to enforce it, and that's what this bill will do. Since I first ran for the General Assembly, I have supported the idea of placing limits on the amount of time any one person can serve in a leadership position or a chairmanship. when you have an individual that holds one of those leadership positions for too long, you naturally get a situation where too much power is concentrated in the hands of one individual. That is sort of anti-democratic with a small d. I think the state is much better served when the entire legislature is empowered to do our jobs and we don't have the concentration of power with one person. So I was happy to support, and the Senate unanimously supported, placing limits on the amount of time any member of the chamber can spend as the president of the Senate or the minority leader of the Senate. So I think what that does is really sort of share the wealth when it comes to influence and the ability to move legislation through the chamber. It makes us a more democratic institution, and I think it's really the right way to move forward. There's a debate about term limits that goes on, and obviously it's very popular, but other people look at the concept that voters should be allowed to elect whomever they want. That in fact there are term limits, they're called elections. But when you look at electing leadership positions, those are elections just made by members of the General Assembly. The public has no role in this. So making this change, I think, ensures that you don't have one person in charge for too long. Leadership positions are different than individual elected positions by the voters. So I think this change is important and a really good move to show that the General Assembly is willing to embrace reforms. Not having a budget is having real consequences. There are social service agencies in our state that are closing. We're putting our universities in jeopardy. I think you're going to see this year universities closing down programs, closing down colleges within the university. We're doing lasting damage to our state's economy, and to our state's reputation. So our number one priority has to be getting a budget in place. And I think both sides have to put aside the partisan divisions, and we might have to slay a few sacred cows in the process. Both sides are going to have to agree to things we don't want to do, but really that's the nature of compromise. And we're going to have to come up with those things if we're going to improve the economy of our state and the reputation of our state. So I'm willing to work across the aisle with my Republican colleagues to meet somewhere in the middle to get a balanced budget and to help develop economically the state. But I think it's important that when we do those, we have to realize who we are here in Springfield to protect. And I've been set here by working men and women to ensure that their lives and their livelihood are protected and not put in jeopardy by state government. But I think we can do those things and reach a compromise at the same time, and that's going to be my goal over the next year.